delayed vote on Capitol Hill. The Senate's plan to replace Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood suffers another setback. A referendum in Venezuela. Millions cast symbolic votes rejecting the country's president. He's looking to reshape the political system. One-on-one with Bill Bennett.
But this just reflects where society is.
We talked to the former White House official on the relationship between President Trump and Congress and the impact on the country. And a glimpse of the past. A new museum with a Catholic connection keeps the legacy of the Portuguese alive in India. We'll take you inside on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, July 17th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Republican bill to replace Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood is in limbo tonight. The Senate Majority Leader once again delays the vote because Republican Senator John McCain is home healing from surgery. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has more. Good evening, Jason.
Senator McCain had surgery Friday to remove a blood clot above his left eye. He is recovering back home in Arizona, so he's out of the office this whole week, and critics are taking advantage of this extra time.
Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back!
Planned Parenthood and other opponents of the Republican health care bill rally at the Capitol today. The abortion provider could lose close to $400 million Medicaid dollars. But pro-lifers are lobbying in support of the bill.
The defunding of Planned Parenthood, that's something that I wanted to do my entire legislative career. And people will say it's 1 year. Well, I can't wait to see Planned Parenthood defunded.
Vice President Mike Pence says he's optimistic the bill will pass.
President Trump and I are confident when the time comes as early as next week that Republicans and Senate are going to come together and they're going to move this bill forward, and we will see the beginning of the end of the nightmare of Obamacare.
The vice president says the Republican plan gives states more flexibility in running their Medicaid programs. But Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, slams the proposed cuts.
That would affect some of the most vulnerable people in our society, including disabled children, poor seniors. It would affect our rural hospitals and our nursing homes, and they would have a very difficult time even staying in existence.
The Congressional Budget Office we were expecting it to release its newest estimates on the Senate health care bill today, but that too, Lauren, has been postponed.
I've interviewed Senator McCain. I know you have interviewed him several times. Tell me how he's doing today.
Well, he's said to be resting back at home. The Mayo Clinic in Phoenix says the surgery went very well. The 80-year-old senator is a 3-time survivor of melanoma. Now, the senators are expected to vote as soon as he comes back to work here. Republicans need 50 of their 52 senators for this health care bill to pass.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. As Congress continues its probe into Russian meddling into the presidential election, the White House is focusing on U.S. jobs and manufacturing. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president is kicking off a week of Made in America events. It's all part of his efforts to improve the American economy, a promise Trump made many times as a candidate.
On the campaign trail, President Trump pledged to bring back U.S. manufacturing jobs.
We're going to bring jobs back to Ohio.
We will stop the jobs from leaving Michigan.
Companies are not going to leave the United States anymore without consequences. Not going to happen.
President Trump says he will do this by renegotiating trade deals and reducing red tape.
Since taking office, I've signed one action after another to eliminate job-killing regulations that stand in a way.
One accomplishment the president touts, keeping about 800 jobs at the Carrier plant in Indianapolis from moving to Mexico. It's a deal he worked on and tweeted about before taking office. The Associated Press says even the jobs that were saved are vulnerable, since contracts for Carrier's union workers are up in 2020. And later this week, Carrier will begin handing pink slips to more than 600 Indianapolis employees as it moves manufacturing jobs to Monterrey, Mexico. The White House says those jobs are separate from the ones the president saved.
We can't believe that American companies want to leave just for the sake of leaving. They do so because they find more fertile ground elsewhere, and that's what the president wants to stop. We need the economy to be growing at 3 to 3.5% minimally, and the president is absolutely committed to that, and we need American companies to be providing the jobs so that we have that kind of growth.
I asked Helen Ferret, the director of White House Media Affairs, if the president would push for Ivanka Trump's clothing line to produce products in America rather than overseas. She told me Ivanka Trump is very concerned about the reports that have come out about the company. Lauren.
What role does Ivanka play in her company now that she works in the White House?
Well, Ivanka Trump stepped back from day-to-day management of her brand before taking on an official role as a White House advisor. Helen Ferret tells me since Ivanka has resigned, she no longer has a say in the operations. There are many critics who say there are still some conflicts of interest.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. In a non-binding vote, millions of Venezuelans symbolically reject President Nicolas Maduro's controversial plan to rewrite the country's constitution. Now, foes of the president are calling for more protests against a leader they call a dictator. National security correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us with the details. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Opposition leaders say time is running out to stop President Maduro. Their goal is to rally behind the 7 million people who voted Sunday against rewriting the Constitution. Ultimately, they want a general election. Government supporters and opposition protesters engage in a shouting match Sunday in Venezuela's capital, Caracas. Venezuelans who back the president are preparing to elect members of a new constituent assembly to retool Venezuela's 1999 constitution. Anti-government groups say if the government gets their way, it will enshrine Nicolas Maduro as a dictator, a move Latin American expert Juan Carlos Hidalgo says would be disastrous.
If the Constituent Assembly in Venezuela is successfully installed in July 30th, that's pretty much checkmate for Venezuela's democracy.
Hidalgo rejects President Maduro's claim that rewriting the country's constitution will restore peace in the country. He says for years the president has been mired in an economic downturn.
The Venezuelan government destroyed the private sector through expropriations, through price controls, exchange controls, and the private sector has been basically decimated. Venezuela doesn't produce anything.
As a result, millions of Venezuelans have fled the country and are living in places like Colombia, Mexico, and Panama. Those who have stayed have little food and little medicine.
Un saluto speciale rivolgo alla comunità cattolica venezuelana.
The Holy Father offering a prayer for Venezuela Sunday as Venezuelan pilgrims gathered for his weekly Angelus. Pope Francis has appealed for peace amid the political crisis. Nearly 100 Venezuelans have died in the violence, 1,500 have been wounded, and 500 have been jailed. Pope Francis has long supported Venezuela's bishops who have been sharply critical of the socialist government. The Holy Father met with the bishops in the Vatican on June 8th, telling them they have his full trust, a seemingly direct response to attempts by the government to set the bishops apart from the Pope. Lauren?
Wyatt, how is the U.S. government reacting to all of this?
Well, Lauren, the U.S. has voiced its concern over President Maduro's socialist policies and alleged human rights abuses. Right now, the State Department warns Americans not to travel to Venezuela because of the violent crime, political unrest, and food and medicine shortages. Lauren.
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby, thank you, reporting. The largest Muslim rebel group in the predominantly Catholic Philippines is trying to arrange a peace deal with the government. They submitted a new draft law aimed at establishing a more powerful Muslim autonomous region. President Rodrigo Duterte pledges to back the bill. It comes in the midst of a deadly siege in the southern Philippines linked to ISIS-inspired militants.
This moment is a significant step forward in our quest to end centuries of hatred, mistrust, and injustice that cost and affected the lives of the millions of Filipinos.
Once established, the autonomous government would be responsible for keeping public order and ensuring safety. A new monument remembers those killed when Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. Thousands of people attended an emotional ceremony in the Netherlands today to mark the 3rd anniversary of the tragedy. Nearly 200 of the 298 people on board were Dutch. Investigators blame Russia for the missile attack, but the country has denied any involvement. The American doctor who says he'll examine Charlie Gard arrives in the UK. A hospital spokesperson confirmed that the doctor, who's working on an experimental gene therapy, visited the hospital this morning, but wouldn't confirm if he saw the 11-month-old who suffers from a terminal condition. His parents are fighting to keep him on life support to bring him to the U.S. The family has received the support of Pope Francis and President Trump. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI remembers his friend, Cardinal Joachim Meisner, who passed away earlier this month. A message from Benedict was read this weekend at the Cardinal's funeral. Marco Tossati has covered the Vatican for decades. His work appears in the Italian newspaper La Stampa. He joins us from Rome. Welcome to the program. Tell us what Benedict said in his message.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And well, Benedict, of course, made a great reminder of his long life friend Joachim Meisner. He was really probably the greatest friend he had and the mastermind behind his election in 2005. And he remembered his role as a fighter in the pre-war and after the war Europe and Germany. And well, he of course spoke about two issues which are very near to his heart. One is secularizations and the shepherds. And he praised Meisner because he was somebody who could oppose himself to the dictatorship of a secularization, more or less.
In the message, the retired Pope compares the church to a boat that at times is on the verge of a shipwreck. It's not the first time he's made comments like this. What does he mean?
Well, I remember when, just before John Paul II died, in the Holy Friday, he spoke about, well, the church as a boat who is really wrenched here and there by the winds of the world. And so it's a similitude very near to the one he made 2 days ago. So I think that he sees, like Paul VI saw, that the secular spirit entered the church and, well, it is endangering the church from the inside. I think that the message he wanted to give in 2005 and right now is the same. Be careful, be aware of what the world tries to do to the church.
Marco Tossati, thank you so much for joining us, a journalist for La Stampa.
Thank you to you.
Coming up, a political divide. President Trump faces backlash from congressional Democrats.
They will not stop until they can remove him, and impeachment will never leave their minds.
Bill Bennett joins me to discuss the toxic political climate. My next guest is one of America's most well-respected voices on politics and culture. He's also a former cabinet member and a prolific author. Joining us now is Bill Bennett, the first director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy and former U.S. Secretary of Education. You're now the host of the Bill Bennett Show podcast.
Right.
Welcome to the program.
Right, welcome to the 21st century.
That's right, where you have to have podcasts and Twitter and Facebook, all of that.
Nobody without all that, that's right.
You wrote the Book of Virtues, which I believe everybody in our newsroom has read. It's just a treasury of moral stories, including stories of the Bible, American history, and fairy tales to modern fiction. It helps shape character for our children and helps their parents, like me, teach morals. The book was released in 1993. Where are we in society now since the writing of this book?
Great question. Not clear, because these are hard things to measure. There's certain clarity about what people think our place is, which is they think we're much worse off. They think we're unhinged, that we've lost, all our grasp.
And that we're much more a secular society than we have ever been.
I don't think there's much question about that. There's an age-old question whether you can sustain morals in the absence of religion. I don't think ultimately you can. But the handholds aren't there, the guardrails aren't there in the view of most American people. Now, when you do tests of this, what are the tests? Oh, they leave a $100 bill, with an ID, and do people
return it or not?
Most people actually do, which is quite interesting. So where are they getting that? Or they're getting it from somebody. But there are some signs that things are weakening. We do know our responsibility as adults remains the same anyway. We have to teach it.
Let's move on to some news of the day. The Senate has delayed the health care bill vote. How bad is this for Republicans? Not this delay this time because of Senator John McCain, but overall that they have not been able to come to a consensus so far.
Lauren, in philosophy we have an expression called insufficient options. No good alternatives. All of the options are bad. If they do nothing, it's bad. Ted Cruz was the guy who said, let's give him credit. If you pass this, remember he did Dr. Seuss and did the whole filibuster?
Standing on
He
the
said, because
floor.
if you pass this, it will be almost impossible to get it undone, even if you have the White House and both houses of the Congress. He predicted that, and he's right. People get used to these things. They get used to these entitlements.
But they got used to Obamacare.
Yes.
And we're changing that, or they're changing that.
But against public views, against opposition. Now it is favored by more people, according to most polls. So there's a problem. But look, Republicans should have been readier. Shakespeare says readiness is all, and they weren't ready on this. What they're going to do is pass something which looks a lot like Obamacare. I think Rand Paul is right about that. But I think they have to, because they can't do nothing. Will it pass? Boy, I don't know. I'll tell you when you're looking at it, because John McCain is out for a day, and that puts the thing right on the edge. That tells you just how close it is.
In your recent podcasts, and you can find that at BillBennett.com, you say that the Donald Trump email story is a political problem, but you don't see it as an impeachable offense. But there are those in Congress who are really gunning for the president. What does this say about the relationship between the president and Congress?
It's very bad, or at least between the president and the Democrat part of Congress. But this just reflects where society is. My friend Alan Gelzo, great historian at Gettysburg, who's a scholar of Lincoln and Civil War, says we are the most divided we have ever been as a country, except for the Civil War. I don't know if that's true. I think maybe 1876 to 1900 was pretty serious too, but it is serious. The divides are very real, and the hatred of Trump is obvious. I mean, I saw Ronald Reagan taking over the Coles, the Bushes. Never saw anything like what was done to Dan Quayle, but this is
potato.
But this is. I mean, they will not stop until they can remove him, and impeachment will never leave their minds. They think he is an illegitimate president, and he can expect 3 or 7 more years of this.
Thank you so much for joining us.
You betcha.
Bill Bennett, First Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, former Secretary of Education.
Thank you.
Up next, a health care delay. Why Senate Republicans face a tough road ahead on a bill that offers more pro-life protections. And the Catholic connection to a 16th century Portuguese mansion in India. A federal court sides with the Archdiocese of New York involving a decision not to renew a Catholic school principal's contract. The case involved St. Anthony's School in Nanuet, New York, 35 miles north of New York City. In 2011, the school decided to cut ties with the principal because of her insubordination toward the church's pastor. She claimed the decision was based on sex discrimination, but The court ruled under the ministerial exemption. The Archdiocese's decision could stand. Our news gathering partners have a lot more on this case, including reaction from the Archdiocese lawyer. You can read it now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Some Americans are concerned the Senate's proposed health care bill will take away their insurance. Joining us now is James Capretta, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he studies healthcare policy. Welcome to the program, James.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
The delay in the vote on the healthcare bill gives opponents more time to make sure it dies. What does the GOP have to do to make sure the bill passes?
Well, there's a few things. I think they need to reassure people that are worried about people having health insurance. So the bill does make pretty dramatic changes relative to current law. It's better than the House bill, I will say, in terms of providing subsidies for people at the low end of the insurance, of the income scale. But on Medicaid, the program that serves the very lowest income Americans, there is a pretty dramatic reform, which I generally support. But I think they may need to reach out a little bit more to the governors in the states that control the Medicaid program to try to sell their idea, maybe make some changes to accommodate their concerns, and make sure that it's clear to everybody in the country there will be a safety net of insurance for people.
Kaiser Family Foundation reports that more than 37 million children in the U.S. were covered by Medicaid in 2016, and the current bill includes cuts to Medicaid. So how do senators justify those cuts when they know it's going to impact children?
Well, actually, it's a complicated bill. It basically rolls back extra federal money for people that are childless adults and have incomes often above the poverty line. So it isn't necessarily aimed at children or the disabled or the elderly, as some critics are saying. It's really a rollback of the insurance coverage that was provided through the Affordable Care Act that was mainly, although not entirely, aimed at people with single adults who didn't have children.
Can you explain what this bare bones coverage plan is that a lot of people, that's what they're saying? And do you think that young people will buy these plans?
Well, this is a separate part of the reform, the non-Medicaid part of the reform for the regular insurance market. And in that, Senator Cruz and others are trying to allow states to come forward with regulations that will allow cheaper, low-cost plans to emerge. I understand the motivation for that, but frankly, I think it's likely to lead to a bifurcation of the market so that healthy people probably could get very low-cost coverage under those kinds of rules, but they'd be removed from the market that is subsidizing, in effect, the high-cost people. So the question is, can that be done without making the high-cost people pay a lot more? I think we're going to get an analysis of that pretty soon from the Congressional Budget Office, and my guess is it won't be very favorable. It'll say that the high-cost people are going to end up having to pay a lot more for their coverage if those regulations go into effect. That could be a problem for the bill. So, look, there's a few details here that still need to be thought through and understood carefully, and that's one of them.
Thank you so much for joining us, James Capretta, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, a 425-year-old mansion in India opens its doors to visitors and offers a glimpse into its colonial history. The home, located in Goa, India, is filled with artifacts dating back to the 17th century. The elegant house features a 200-year-old private chapel dedicated to Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary. Catholicism isn't the only religion featured in this home.
All the furniture is made in Goa by Goans and by Hindus, Muslims, and Catholics. And normally the Hindus, they used to put something of their god or goddesses or the mythology. And then here we see that this for sure is made by Hindus.
Goa was a Portuguese colony until 1961. Portuguese missionaries spread the faith throughout India and converted many there to Catholicism. It is said St. Thomas the Apostle traveled to the country and died there in the 1st century. Quite a history lesson. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn, and please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night, and God bless you.